Don Siegel's 1956 film, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, is a classic motion picture that most people are likely at least vaguely familiar with, even if they haven't officially seen it before. The film plays to the paranoid American zeitgeist of the era, as Cold War politics were coming into full swing, and fears of communist infiltration in all sectors of the nation became increasingly peaked.
Yeah. Are you now, or have you ever been to communism?
There to match the sentiments of the vexed public, Don Siegel's science fiction film arrived jam-packed with a potent and uncomfortable exploration of human extinction by the hands of apathetic, alien doppelgangers born from seed pods. The basic premise is chilling, poignant, and one which I recall seeing allusions to in a few different television shows years prior to my viewing of the film. One such example being an episode of SpongeBob SquarePants entitled Planet of the Jellyfish, which followed a plotline clearly referential to the sci-fi classic. I find the prevalence of these references to be indicative of the original tale's everlasting cultural impact. Particularly in American society, it is often cited as a cautionary allegory for an abrasive takeover of the United States by an alien and malignant ideology, ostensibly communism.
In recognizing a communist, physical appearance counts for nothing.
Though it was concocted during the tumultuous period in American history, now known as the Red Scare, and it certainly works as an anti-communist piece, the film's overarching themes are conveyed broadly and express a universally appreciated message absent any political subtext. Autonomy and individualism are the most valuable, yet endangered, human rights. In the film, a county doctor, Miles Bennell, returns from a trip to find that the townsfolk he's known his entire life are no longer what they seem. It starts with the occasional, seemingly unsubstantiated and excessively paranoid rumor that a certain relative is, quote, not themselves, then intensifies with the discovery of a body replica of one of the living residents. As Miles descends further down the rabbit hole, discovering another duplicate body, and then the very alien seeds from which they propagate, he finds that a foreign enemy within their midst is multiplying. Nobody is who they seem, and his small town is no longer a safe haven.
They're over there!
Miles' downward spiral as he excavates the horrifying truth hidden in the familiar nooks and crannies of his hometown is excellently heightened by the rapid pacing. The film never feels dull or overly slow, and, seeing as how the runtime amounts to a quick 80 minutes, the frequency in which events occur complements the intended tone beautifully. It begins with a couple of discoveries which, strange as they may be, are easily explained and brushed off as coincidental anomalies. Yet as the plot thickens and the sheer volume of supposed anomalies becomes too large to ignore, Miles finds himself drowning in evidence, pointing to his own entrapment. As the film reaches the end, he's staring his oppressors right in the face.
Their bodies were now hosts harboring an alien form of life, a cosmic form, which to survive must take over every human man. So I ran.
Though it's on the shorter side, the events don't happen in the blink of an eye, and the film manages to maintain a good rhythm throughout. Considering the brief 80-minute runtime, I think the film did an excellent job with establishing the characteristics of a few townsfolk early on, and abruptly subverting our initial conception of these characters later on, in order to eerily convey their transition into inhuman pod people. For example, the beginning of the film shows an expressive and outspoken young boy who fears his own mother is an imposter and thus displays a tremulous disposition. In the film's second act, the boy is shown in Miles' office and is strangely cured of such concerns, displaying a demeanor which is uncomfortably altered from his prior one. It's then quite apparent that something strange has happened.
He certainly made a quick recovery.
I guess we all have.
Guiding the audience through it all, the addition of Miles' voiceover narration provides a greater sense of intimacy, as if we're right alongside him while he navigates this hostile takeover. I think it works rather well, and the film is given a nice noir feel, providing a voice to the paranoia, fitting for the time period.
I don't know what it was. Call it a premonition, but suddenly I had the feeling that Becky was in danger. I had to get to her as quickly as possible.
The concept on which the film's plot is predicated is wonderfully dreadful as is, though the terror is best realized via the film's visuals, acting, and short-lived, though appropriately eerie, special effects work. Though effective in their moments, the circumstances dictated by the story deem lofty efforts from the special effects department unnecessary. Aside from a few seed pods grotesquely birthing their duplicate versions of the townspeople, the film doesn't really see a whole lot of unsavory biological horror. Instead, much of the focus is placed on simply sowing the seeds of doubt and paranoia in both Miles and the audience. Though in many ways similar to a zombie movie, Invasion of the Body Snatchers explores an evil much more sinister and intending. The pod people are duplicitous and conspiring, rather than ravenously mindless. They put on the neighborly guise in order to coax their prey into a false sense of security, dropping the act altogether once achieving a secure enough majority, at which point they are free to resort to more primitive means of persuasion. Apathetic, cold, and inhuman as they may be, these pod people are schemers more than their aimless, zombified counterparts.
Men, women, and children suddenly convinced themselves that their relatives weren't their relatives at all. So your mind started playing tricks, and reality became unreality.
There is, however, one segment of the film in which the pod people are at their most zombie-esque, as they pursue Miles and his lady friend, Becky, in droves like some sort of unthinking hive mind amalgamation. Admittedly, this climactic chase sequence hammers in a theme of animalistic mass consonance perfectly, as there is absolutely no question as to the inhumanity of these facades. Coupled with the surprisingly disturbing scene of these creatures picking up additional pods from the truckloads worth, the pod people are made out to be an interconnected, contagious, and self-serving virus.
It's a malignant disease spreading through the whole country.
The ensuing coordination and primitive drive of these collectives really punches in a unique sense of danger, which betrays the perceived security of close-knit communities of the time in a manner defining for the film. A doctor who once was a vital part of his tender and jovial community now finds himself fleeing in breathless dread from what appears to be those very same neighbors. A nightmare perhaps not so unlike those of the American public at the time.
But there are other communists who don't show their real faces, who work more silently.
Though fear of nuclear destruction was certainly a prevalent concern during these years of the Cold War, the film clearly suggests that human annihilation can come in more ways than one. When drained of their vitality, and therefore resigned to a conformist worldview, people may as well be dead anyways. The film takes most of its runtime to present such a change as it occurs, though we only get to see the infiltration of Santa Mira. When Miles escapes the pod people, however, we're given a glimpse into just how far this cancer spreads. In desperation, a frazzled Miles heralds his cautionary messages to dismissive drivers on the freeway, who shoo him away and ignore his cries. This is perhaps an indictment of the subset of emotionally bankrupt, unaware Americans who pay such an impending threat no heed. We're not quite sure as to just how many of these drivers are infected already, but even if they are all human, the future doesn't seem any less dim. With this moment in mind, the film's broader themes appear to be one of caution, a forewarning of what Don Siegel believed to be an approaching epidemic of apathy in America, if not the world as well.
Can't you see? They're after you! They're after all of us! Our wives, our children, everyone! They're here already! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next! You're next!
Though the messages proclaimed by Invasion of the Body Snatchers are as meaningful today as they were all those decades ago, and they are frequently delivered in a fashion undeniably residual, the film does not always exhibit such grace. My main gripe with the film would be that some of the dialogue felt unnecessary, preachy, and overtly on the nose. There's one scene in particular that really bogged down the movie for me, with excessive explaining on the part of a couple of pod people confronting Miles and Becky.
Less than a month ago, Santa Mira was like any other town, people with nothing but problems. Then out of the sky came a solution. Seeds drifting through space for years took root in a farmer's field.
The dialogue here felt too cliché and seemed to dip into the generic villain monologue trope, despite the fact that the film is anything but a typical hero versus villain story. I suppose it helped to explain the messages to the audience, but it ultimately was way less effective than the stellar visuals laced throughout. I found that the themes of the film were much more impactful when conveyed through the sheer lifelessness of the pod people and their perfunctory ant-like synchronicity juxtaposed to the frightened awareness of Miles and his friends. Hell, so much as a concerned yelp for a dog about to be trampled by a truck ends up being enough to oust Miles and Becky from their alien counterparts.
Watch out! I'm sorry, Miles.
These moments are evidence enough for the intrinsic, irreplicable traits possessed by genuine humans, yet the film doesn't give its audience quite enough credit, and thus we're given a dialogue dump of superfluous elaborations. It's perhaps to be expected of a film from the 1950s, as this was somewhat a commonplace in cinema at the time, as it still kind of is today, but it remains in my mind a textbook example of why writers should show rather than tell. But thankfully, the film doesn't have much trouble with this at all, aside from this one hiccup.
And you're reborn into an untroubled world.
Where everyone's the same.
Exactly.
What a world.
As someone who loves Don Siegel's most renowned work, Dirty Harry, I am thoroughly impressed to find that Invasion of the Body Snatchers, which came out 15 years prior, lusters with that same magic touch that initially won my admiration for his directorial capabilities. Like his later police thriller, Invasion of the Body Snatchers exudes a bravado and a boldness that is so crucial to the themes of his works. Having made the film during a period of heightened fear and paranoia in not just broader America, but within Hollywood in particular, Don Siegel and the screenwriter Daniel Mainwaring were clearly looking to go against the grain and make a statement against the norms of the time. Given the existence of a Hollywood blacklist, barring a good number of talented individuals from taking part in the movie-making process based on suspicions of communist sympathies, Invasion of the Body Snatchers seemed a way for Siegel and Mainwaring to question the trajectory of the movie business. If such practices as those promoted by the existence of a blacklist remained a routine element in the hiring process, at what point would Hollywood, and by proxy America as a whole, completely shift into the very thing they were so vehemently swearing off? Though it certainly could be asking these questions, the film is by no means a strictly political statement. In fact, Don Siegel has gone on record explicitly claiming the contrary, viewed as more of a wide-ranging allegory than a hot-blooded, intentionally targeted indictment of any one political faction or of any particular doctrine in America or Hollywood. Invasion of the Body Snatchers, like many everlasting works of fiction, leaves room for audience postulation, whether viewed as a response to the increasingly divisive politics permeating Hollywood during the film's inception, or even as a fantastical exploration of the loss of identity felt by suburbanites in a post-World War II, rampantly consumerist America. The film is capable of fitting many different interpretations. Just as the seed pods in the film can easily morph into any chosen host, the film itself is somewhat of a canvas for the audiences looking to reach greater meaning. No matter what approach a viewer takes in their hypothesizing, however, there is no doubt that the film bolsters a rigid theme of humanity's beauty in the ensuing necessity of a prevailing individualism and a love for life itself. Whether threatened by the procreation of entities antithetical to true living, or faced with the induction of a culture more superficial and dehumanizing than the last, the aim of maintaining that spark of life becomes more vital than all else.
Stop acting like a fool, Miles, and accept us.
No. Never.
Invasion of the Body Snatchers not only props up some ageless themes that are rightfully cherished by many, but it also provides some memorable scares in the process. Through its depiction of a people, and thus a world, wholly drained of their emotion and vitality, the film wields one of the most iconic plots in movie history. Having also inspired a handful of remakes years after the fact, there's no question as to the cultural impact of this gem. For all these reasons and more, I deem Don Siegel's Invasion of the Body Snatchers a hallmark of classic American cinema and old Hollywood. It delivers powerful themes that remain relevant to this day, and it is a must-watch for all moviegoers, especially enjoyers of the horror genre.